Very moved to be back here. Can't believe it's been, 18 years, I think we figured out, since we've been here, and we come back and we spend time, and it feels in some ways like it was yesterday. In some ways, it feels like it was so long ago. It is great to see old friends, which can mean two different things. It can mean friends that have been friends for a very long time. It can also mean friends who are old. Let's just say it could also mean both, right? And new friends, right? Already meeting some friends that we're making now as you've come and connected with the church in different paths over the last 18 years. Let the little children come from me, I see over here. They have come, but they are growing and growing and growing. So I want to share a slide. Yes, if we could. Do I have a slide here? Yeah, this is a family update. This was actually 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, back in Virginia, just about 2 hours from where we live. This is near Charlottesville, Virginia. And that lady in white, the bride, is our little Caitlin, who was 8 years old when we moved here. And here she is. It's, of course, her wedding day. She married just a fine young man, and Corey there in the middle. There you see our other two daughters. Next to Corey is Jessica, if you might remember her, for those who were here. And then our daughter Sarah and her boyfriend, who is half Italian. So there's that. And it was just a beautiful time. And we feel very blessed, and so I share this as a bit of a family update and also good news from the Ome family. But let's move on and talk about what we're here to talk about. If I could see the next slide. So before we came here, we were in Prague, and before Prague, I was in London. I was doing some work. I do some business consulting and trainings, and I was in London for that, and then we went to Prague, and then we came to Amsterdam. But we came to Amsterdam and had a couple of extra days. So we went to Delft, and then we took the train to Bruges. And here we are just near where we're staying. And this is actually a guild house where the painter Johannes Vermeer had studied his art of painting and learned and was apprenticed by another Dutch painter and joined a school to learn his art. Of course, he is known, today as one of the greats. And I took this picture thinking, there's might be a time where I want to talk about this idea of the guild, right? This idea of like how people used to learn to do the things that they do. So a guild like this was not just for artists, but they had it for really any work or any craft. And, it might be for working with iron or working with wood, or in his case, working with art. And this idea that you will learn from somebody who has gone before you and has had, has the experience. And then you spend time in this relationship learning from others how to do the thing that you're wanting to do. And so my understanding, and it's great to be with the Brooks. Now, I consider them, are they old friends or are they new friends? And I think they're both, right? Because they're all three. You qualify for all three. They came and helped us start the church in Bucharest, Romania in 1994. Can you imagine that? We were young, they were even younger, and we were all just walking by faith. And God just did amazing things. After a week of us all being there, there were over 500 people that came to that first church service in Bucharest. So we spent that week together. And then a couple other times we've connected. But now I feel like we're really walking together, and really we're working together on what we're doing here. We're working together for the leadership conference that's coming in Milan next week. So we feel very blessed to walk with you and really strengthen that relationship. So old friends, new friends, old friends, all of that. But then when I took this picture, I thought there might be some time where I would want to kind of share this as an idea. And then I was thinking about Misha, and he said, well, we're doing this series on being an apprentice to Jesus, right? Is that okay, I'm on the right track. And then I thought, well, this picture fits today Because if we're going to be apprentices for Jesus, we're going to learn how to live. We're going to learn how to relate. We're going to learn how to love. We're going to learn how to work. We're going to learn all of this from Jesus, because that's why God, the Son of God came to earth, was so that we could have an opportunity to connect with him and learn from him. So that's our topic today. And I want to share a passage from Colossians chapter 1, if you want to follow along. And we're going to mainly be in John, the Gospel of John, John chapter 15 for the most part. But the concept seemed to connect well with this verse in Colossians 1. So I did want to read that starting in verse 15. And this is relating more to the whole series that you're doing on this theme, as well as this morning. But in Colossians 1, verse 15, in this English version, it says, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him." Wow. And I just love this phrase, in the English translated as the image of the invisible, right? In the Greek, or it's the ikone aroratos, image of the invisible, because God in the heavens is invisible to us, but God came to earth in the form of Jesus to make the invisible visible, so that we could know who he is and we could know the life that we are to live, so that we could be an apprentice to Jesus. So that's our theme today. Jesus shows us who God is. Jesus shows us how to live. So let's look at Jesus. A little bit of me personally. So I did not grow up as a believer. And I did not grow up going to church very often. I would go very rarely with my father. My father and mother were divorced, but we would go with my father to church for Easter. We would go with my father to church for Christmas, and that kind of thing. Those were really the only times that I went to church. And church, the kind of church it was a very high church, very formal setting, very formal service, and I didn't understand any of it. And as a little kid, right, you just kind of like this and ready to get out and move, because I was always wanting to move. And so I didn't really have any sense of God. There was no connection to God. And church, my experience of church didn't help with that in any way. And it wasn't until, it was in my, say, young 20s when I was a university student, and I had friends that were believers, and then they sat down and we actually looked at the Bible and had a very real conversation around what are the stories, and looking at Jesus just through the pages of the Bible was such a different experience than the Jesus that I experienced in the church that I had gone to. And this idea that Jesus was very relatable. Jesus walked the earth. Jesus experienced real things, and the people around Jesus were very real people. And they had personalities, and they had strengths, and they had weaknesses, and they failed, and they stood up, and they had questions, and they were confused, and they had doubts, and they had faith. And I said, that's a story I can relate to. And so that's the story that we're going to talk about today as we move into John chapter 15. So let's go ahead and move into John. So I don't really have any other slides today, because we're just going to work through this together. I'm actually going to ask a couple questions, and hopefully you could feel free to participate, share your thoughts when we get to those points. But John 15, before I start reading any scriptures, we just need to really try to embrace the context of what's happening in the Gospel of John here. So the Gospel stories, these are the 4 different versions of the life of Jesus. How Jesus lived, his teachings, his interactions, and there are 4 different portraits that we get of Jesus. And John is a very interesting one. He's very colorful in his way of describing Jesus and his life. A lot of imagery, a lot of metaphor. So I love all that. But one thing we need to understand about the gospel stories, including John, is in a way, the story moves quite quickly for about half of the story, or 2/3 of the story. So John chapter 1 through 15 is a story of his life and where he went, things that he did, and different interactions. And we get about 3 years of information in those 15 chapters. So there's a lot happening, and he moves really quickly. But right around chapter 15, the story slows down. Everything slows down. And the rest of the Gospel of John, right, the next, about third of it, is just describing the last week of Jesus' life. And that's the way it is with all the Gospels. So it's a clue to us that this is the part we're supposed to really give the most attention to. And this is the part that helps make all the other part make sense. And we're going to talk about that as we go through here. So John chapter 12, Jesus is in Jerusalem. He's getting anointed. People aren't really sure what's going on with that. He's starting to talk about his death. And that was very confusing because you got to remember and try to put yourselves in the shoes of the disciples of that time. Jesus was this triumphant figure and he was winning, and now he's talking about dying. And that didn't make any sense for them at the time. In John chapter 13, we know the story of him washing the disciples' feet, and he's preparing them for his departure in ways, again, that they don't really understand and imagine. Right? What a beautiful picture, because normally, if you knew somebody was going to die, everyone would be honoring them and washing their feet in some way or the other. But Jesus is choosing this time to honor the disciples and wash their feet. So it's just amazing, the stories. But really, that's the last action of the Gospel of John until we get into that last week, what we call the Passion Week. So in John 14, 15, and 16, it's much more reflective. So the passage that we're going to read is a reflection. And we won't be able to make sense of it unless we really understand the stories that he's referring to in the earlier parts of the gospel. So we'll talk about what that looks like. John 15, we get this picture of the vine and the branches, this idea of remain in me and I will remain in you, which would have been a great thing to preach on, but I had to choose one thing, so I'm going to move past that very tasty story about the vine and the branches. But the idea that Jesus introduces there is the idea that we're going to work with today, which is abide in me. Yeah, you're shaking your hand like you know what that means. I speak English from the day I was learning to talk, and nobody says the word abide. Maybe in England, we're going to abide together. But in America, that's a word we never use, right? So abide in me and abide in the Lord. And, I'm like, what does that really mean? And actually, as you get into the rest of the passage, I'm sort of asking similar questions. So what I love to do in those moments is do a word study. And I love to see what is that word, how does it show up in different passages? This is me not preaching about the Jesus and the vine, right? But I just wanted this thought is so important to setting up the message. But the word abide appears in numerous different times in the New Testament. And 3 that I chose that just give us a sense of what this word actually is trying to communicate to us. So in Matthew 10, when when the disciples are going around, and Jesus says, when you go into a town, he says, stay at the house. Stay at one house. Stay at that house until you leave the city. So that word stay, that's the same word, right? Stay until it's time to go. Okay. How about Jesus when he was in the garden? And he was with his disciples, and he's about to go to the cross. And he's emotionally distressed. He's working this out with the Father. And what does he say to the disciples in that moment? Stay with me. That's the word, stay. Abide in the other translation. Stay with. So you're getting the sense of the depth of what this word is really meaning, to stay. In Hebrews 7, there's talk about the priesthood and, relating Jesus to the great high priest. And in chapter 7, it talks about the priest The high priest Melchizedek serves in that office permanently, forever. He stays in. That's the word stay. So when Jesus is saying, abide in me, stay with me, that's the kind of word that he is referring to. Now let's go in John 15 to the part that we're really going to dig into. And that's starting in verse 9. And I'm going to take it piece by piece. I'll have to be honest. When I read this verse, it's actually 9 through 17. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And the first time I read through it, I thought I had a hard time connecting with it. Because it is high-level language, it's reflective language. You know, the first time sometimes I read parts of the Bible, and if I don't do something else, it just comes off a little bit superficial, to be honest. You know, it's the kind of thing that might show up in a card that you would give somebody on a special occasion, right? We call that, like a Hallmark card. And in the US, we have Hallmark movies, right? Where you're supposed to laugh and cry and they make it in the end and it's all works out and it's beautiful. That would be a Hallmark moment. And this is one of those verses that if I don't really wrestle with it, it can kind of come off like that, right? But there's so much richness here that I look forward to digging into with you. So as we go into the passage, we're going to see deeper levels. We're going to see the power of God in really, really deep dimensions. We're going to see the depth of what it really means to love God and to love each other, which is essentially the message that is there. But we're going to look at and see what's referenced in that is suffering, it's sacrifice, it's loss, it's pain, it's struggle, it's death that leads to life. That's the kind of love that we're talking about and the kind of message that we're talking about. So John 15, we're going to start here now that we have the context. The story is slowed down. Hopefully we have slowed down so we can just really be still and be in this moment, starting in verse 9. John 15, verse 9, which says, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love." And you see what I mean? Like the first time you read that, you're like, oh, that's nice. That's really sweet. Like, oh, God loves Jesus and Jesus loves God and he loves us and we love him and we all love together. And then we look around at the world and the things that we prayed about at the beginning and it doesn't look like that in a lot of places. So what's going on here? I mean, really the whole message is right here in this one verse, right? If we can get this verse downloaded and live it in our mind, heart, soul, and strength, we're going to be in a really good place. But what is Jesus saying here? As the Father has loved me. So this goes back to the idea of the apprenticeship, of being a student, right? What we're learning here is that we're supposed to see the relationship between the Father and the Son as a model. That's what Jesus is saying. Just as God has loved me, so I have loved you. So Jesus is saying that the love that he has for the disciples and ultimately for us is modeled after, is a reflection of the love the Father has for him. And we're going to look at very specific ways that that's expressed, because that's where it really gets real. And then the idea that the love that we have for Jesus and ultimately the love that we have for one another is modeled after Jesus' love for us. See how that works? So we are all at school, like we're in the building, when we're in church, when we're in our quiet time, when we're in prayer, when we're in spiritual conversations. Right now in this moment, this is where we are. We're at school. We're in this place of learning to look to God, to look to Jesus, and understand through that reflection the life that we're called to live, okay? So let's see, what does this all mean? What is the love of how did God show his love to Jesus? That's the first question if we're really investigating this passage. So I want to go back to chapter 3. So if you could just turn there, John chapter 3. And we've a couple of passages in John earlier where he actually describes how God showed love to the Son. Right? So that's important information for us if that's supposed to be a reflection of how Jesus loves us and how we are supposed and called to love the world and each other. So now we're in John 3, verse 35, and let me read. It says, "The Father loves the Son and has placed everything in his hands." So what that's telling us is one of the ways that God loves the Son and loved the Son was he entrusted everything into his hands. So let me just ask this question, and I am asking. I'd love to hear what you think. What are some of the things that God, the Father, entrusted to Jesus the Son? What comes to mind for you? Sorry? Okay, judging the world. Although then Jesus said, I actually don't judge the world, but the Word serves as the judge. So that's an interesting conversation there. What else? Yes?
Yeah, just our heart saving humans, entrusting
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah, the mission to reach us, to save us from our sin and from our rebellion, the Father entrusted that important mission to the Son. Other thoughts? Yeah. Perform miracles, right? That's great. Yes.
Raising up the disciples.
Okay. Entrusted to the Son. What else?
Healing people.
Healing people. God is a God of healing. He gave that power, gave that mission to part of Jesus when he walked the earth. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
He showed us who God was.
Yeah. Yeah. I want my people, my creation to know me. So I'm going to entrust that work to the Son, right? Think about all that God entrusted to the Son, showed his love through that. How about creation itself? Right? Genesis chapter 1, the act of creation really came through the agent of Jesus. Study that, you'll see. So God's act of creation happened through Jesus. We talked about the mission, to seek and to save the lost. Us is a part of that calling. And ultimately, really, all of that fulfilled in the cross. So then the question is, this idea of, wow, God really entrusted his most precious things to the Son. That was the love that was shown there. And so then the question, of course, we want to ask each step of the way is, all right, well, what does that mean for us? Like, what does that mean for me? If I'm supposed to model the way that I show up in the world after the way the Father loves the Son and after the way Jesus loves us, then what does that look like in my life? What does that look like in my relationships? What does that look like in my home? What does that look like at work, in the community, with people around me? And this word trust, and trusting, to people. And that's a tough one for me. In my nature, I grew up in a world that I thought, I'll do better if I take control, right? Because it felt unsafe. My parents got divorced. We all have, things that have happened in our lives that can make us feel like I need to take charge here because other people maybe aren't doing it as well as I feel like should be. And so I'm going to take charge and I'm going to determine my path and set the rules. And I tried all that. And then I found out I don't do a very good job at that. I took control and I drove myself into sin and drove myself into broken relationships and drove myself into a distant relationship with my parents and drove myself into a deep, selfish independence where I got to do whatever I wanted and go wherever I wanted. And I ended up on the other side all alone. And it was in that place that I started praying different prayers. God, I want a different life. Help me to see. And so this first idea of trust. And so let me ask you, what could that look like in our lives? Right? When we're showing, if we're going to model our love after the love that the Father has for us, how can we show that through the vehicle of trust and entrusting. What does that look like? Any thoughts about that?
I think sharing our lives with people.
That's a big one. Sharing our lives with people. I didn't do that until I was in my 20s. After I became a Christian. Nobody knew what was going on inside of me. And truth is, I didn't either, because I never talked about it. So sharing our lives, like that's our precious story, trusting that to somebody else. That's a vulnerability, but that's an act of love. What else? Yeah.
Sharing at work what I learned through the weekend
Yeah.
about marriage.
Right. Sharing things, our experiences, sharing our learnings, not knowing how somebody's going to respond, like, oh, great, good for you, see ya, like it's vulnerable. Yeah.
Taking care of the needy.
Okay. Yeah. Beautiful. Certainly God's heart. Yes.
Live our life as what Jesus asked, so people can see
Yeah.
that we are disciples.
Yeah. To live.
Without doing anything, so people can see us.
Yeah. Yeah. To live the light of Jesus so that others can see that light through us. So there's a lot of ways that we can do this. Some other thoughts I had was assuming the best about people, right? That's a trust. It doesn't mean you're right. They might prove you wrong. They might break that trust. They might hurt you. They might not have the best intention for you in a particular moment. That is people. I have been that person to other people at times in my life. So our decision to trust doesn't mean it's all going to go well. Our decision to think the best and assume the best doesn't mean that somebody is going to handle that well. See, that's their responsibility. And that's their walk with God, and that's their walk on earth. But from my side, can I start in a place of openness? Can I start in a place of giving as God did with Jesus, as Jesus did with us? That is trust. All right, what else? Inviting people in. We've talked about that, letting people in, all of that. Let's move on to John chapter 5. So a couple chapters later, there's another interesting verse about how we can, how God showed his love to the Son, and then what that opens up for us. So now we're in John 5:19. John 5:19. So I'll just give you a moment to find that. And I'm going to read John 5:19 through 20. Jesus gave them this answer, very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. Wow. He can only do what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. So again, we see a verse that tells us how God showed his love to the Son. And he showed it through transparency. He showed love to the Son, say, here's what's going on, here's how it's going to be. Yes, even the cross is a part of the plan, but we're going to have, we're going to be open about that. So that's how God shows his love. So the question again is if that's how God loves Jesus, if that's how Jesus showed his love to us, then how can we show love through this lens of transparency? And I'll just share a thought that I had, because it challenged me. This one actually really challenged me. As I thought about, one thing that seemed obvious to me is okay, creating time and space for relationships, to really get to know each other. Yesterday, I think maybe the best part of the marriage workshop that we had was people just, in the middle, we had a coffee break. At the end, we had a coffee break, because one thing I've learned in the Netherlands is you will have many coffees and you'll have many coffee breaks. And I love that, because coffee is always connected with conversation. It's not about the coffee, it's about the conversation. And I just loved the way there were just great conversations that were taking place. People talking about, what's going on and sharing and connecting. So this idea of showing love by creating time and space for relationships so that we can get to know each other, so we can have that transparency about us. But then the thought that actually convicted me was this idea, God was transparent with Jesus, and Jesus was transparent with us because he actually shared what he was doing and why. And I don't like that. So Karen and I will be going through things. We're making plans. We're traveling. We do a lot of traveling. And let's say we could be, as it's true here in Amsterdam, okay, now it's time to get here. And now what I've done is I've researched, I've looked at everything. I've got the buses worked out. I've got how far it is to walk. I've got what time to leave. I just have that, logistical need to be satisfied, I guess. And I take that role typically. And so I've done all this work. And now we have a good plan. I know how to get there, what time. And then Karen, it's time to go. And she'll ask, like, well, how are we getting there? I said, no, it's worked out. Oh, but are we going to go this? Well, no, I've got it worked out, right? And she's asking questions. And it's hard for me sometimes to create the space to just say, here's the process I went through to help understand. And the reason I feel comfortable about it, because now I know all the steps. And she's asking the same question I would ask if I didn't know what all the steps were. But now I'm just saying, no, just go with it. And so this idea, I just felt challenged in that, is just sharing why. Like, why do I think that way? Why do I come to that idea, right? And that's an act of love, because I don't want to do that. Because the selfish part of me is like, I've already worked for this. Can we just go?
Right, exactly.
Thank you. All right. Feeling me there. All right, we're in the same space. So it's a decision, that transparency, this idea of sharing what we're learning. I think that you shared, Saskia, can go with this idea as well. Like, here's what I'm learning. Here's what I'm starting to understand. Here's where I'm a little confused. And just having those open conversations. That is love. Okay, let's keep going. Now back to John 15. So this is, I think, where we're going to spend the rest of the time. John 15, where we started. We're going to be now in verse 10. So let me get there. John 15, we already read verse 9. As the Father loved me, I've loved you. Remain in my love. Abide. We already broke that down. So we're going to pick it up. John 15. Now in verse 10, it says, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. So once again, we get this idea that Jesus' relationship with the Father serves as a model for our relationship with God. Jesus says, you know what? I was obedient to the Father. And now I'm calling you to the same thing that I lived and walked for the 3 years that I was on earth with you. Asking now and inviting your responses, what are some ways that Jesus showed obedience to the Father? Sorry? He died, right? Did Jesus want to die? No. Was it easy to go to the cross? Absolutely not. So that is exactly right. It was an act of obedience to the plan of the Father. What else?
That in Matthew 5, he says, I do not come to abolish the law, but to give a further interpretation.
Yeah.
He doesn't make his own.
Right.
That's what God already said in the Old Testament. Just gives further interpretation. He does not want to rewrite it.
Right. Right. And not only does he want to offer that interpretation, but he offers it not just through teaching, but through living. Right? Let me show you what this looks like, not just tell you what it should be. What else? Yeah.
Even the whole idea of putting himself in the hand of two human beings,
Yeah.
Mary and Joseph,
Yeah.
and be trained by human beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Humility, yeah.
Right. Right. So submitting to human parents. All right, let me just ask really quickly. How many of us who are human parents did everything right at every time, at every age, in every moment? Just go ahead and raise your hand. I'd love to meet you. There we go. Let's have a conversation afterwards. so I can learn. We have fun with that. Of course not. You know, the kids would not stand for you to raise your hands, right? They're right here. Love you. You guys are great. You did your best, did some great things, made some mistakes, right? And so Jesus submitted to that because that was the plan of the Father. Wow. Which meant he was going to be misled at times. It means he was going to be hurt at times. There were all those human experiences were going to happen. Okay, what else? How did Jesus show his obedience to the Father? Yes?
In Luke 4, it talks about how he resisted temptation and refuted the devil each time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's also he countered with God's word.
Right.
That's also the way he.
Powerful story. The devil was offering him an easier path. You can actually have this dominion over all the earth if you would just submit to me. And it was an easier path. You could have signed it right there, done. But of course, that would not have led to the spiritual freedoms that we experience today. So great example. Submitted to that. Yeah.
Yeah, he memorized he went through the Jewish school. It means he would have had to memorize first 5 books of the Bible and probably the prophets as well.
Yeah. He's doing the work. Yeah, he's doing the work. Right? But all these ways that Jesus showed his obedience to the Father. And we're here today, and we had communion today because Jesus did that. That's love. That's love. When he was challenged, when he was tempted, all of these stories, right? We can get to a place in our modern world where the thinking is, well, I'll do it if I feel like it. You know, if it feels good, I'll do it. If I'm not up to it, maybe I won't do it. Right? If it's popular, I'll do it. If it's not popular, I won't do it. There's all these ideas that are floating around of how we can make those kinds of decisions. And this idea of obedience, it's not a word that is just out there in popular culture, right? I remember when we were here, a word that was around a lot of places was tolerance. It was on all the signs, and it seemed to be a whole campaign. And there's good ideas around tolerance, right? But then also you can get a little bit too far with that. There's also obedience. I didn't see any signs in Amsterdam. Like, reminding me to be obedient. Yes, thank you for that reminder on the metro, right? That's not the message. And yet it is in Jesus. And one of the things that we have been doing over these past several years, Saskia alluded to it, we go around and we arrive in different churches. We spend a little bit of time. It could be a few days. It could be a few weeks. It could be a couple of months. And we work with those churches and we work with the leaderships of those churches and just whatever the need is in that place. And it varies. I feel like God has used us to strengthen and encourage and equipping some people. Every time, though, to be honest, we are strengthened and encouraged. You go to some of these churches, especially in Eastern Europe, and you meet a sister who is smiling and loving, and she brought a cake, and then you find out it's 2 hours for her to take a bus from her town to get to church. And she's one of the first ones there every Sunday. And that moves me. That faith, that obedience. Like, this is not easy, but this is God's plan for my life, and I'm going to do it. It's such an upward call. We see people in these difficult circumstances living faithfully, and it challenges me in a good way, calls me higher to want to live that obedient life. So love through obedience, those are not two different ideas. In the Lord, they work together. And love through obedience. It's a whole area of study you can do on your own. Let's move on to the next verse. Where are we? We went through 10 and 11, yes? So that would mean, but I don't know if I read 11. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Which, wow, he just talked about obedience. Obedience, obey, get in line. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about aligning with the will of the Father so that we can live a life that blossoms like a Dutch garden, right? with color and life so we can have joy. That's the goal. That's the heart of the Father. He sees us as our kids and he says, I want you to have joy, but you got to understand, this is the path you need to take in order to find it. Don't believe the way the world lays it out. Don't believe in the easy path. Don't believe in the selfish road, because it will fail. Follow Jesus, follow me, and I'll lead you to that place of joy. That's the Spirit. All right, and let's move on then from 11 to 12, where it says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. Well, then I want to come to that next idea later. So 12, let's talk about 12. How is the love of the Father expressed through the Son? Over here, my friend said it at the beginning, the cross, right? The death of Jesus, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus is the pure expression of God's love. And if we were to choose one word, perhaps that word would be sacrifice. Love is demonstrated through sacrifice. And we see that the Father sacrificed the Son. For him to go through all that he went through and ultimately die on the cross, that was an act of sacrifice. It was an act of love. And we are called to that same path. The highest, purest form of joy is when we sacrifice. As Christians, we're called to give up sin and give up things that are going to hurt us or hurt other people. That's one dimension. But sacrifice is a whole higher level. Sacrifice means you're going to give up something that may not even be a bad thing. But it's a choice that you're making so that somebody else can be strengthened. It's sacrifice. It's our calling. It's our commitment. It's our lives. But I know for me personally, it's a battle. There's a spiritual battle because there's this force that is constantly wanting me to be selfish. It's called my sinful nature. And every morning I'm in the same battle. That's why every morning I'm in the Bible. That's why every morning I'm in prayer, because I don't want to choose that life. But I have to be in that battle, because if I just sort of float through life and maybe show up to church on Sunday, but really don't do any other work spiritually, I will become more like I was before Jesus met me. Because I want that in my sinful nature. But my spirit says, no, I want Jesus. No, I want the Lord. I want to live a godly life. And I remember talking with a brother who called me, is a close brother in Virginia, and he called me up or texted me or whatever, and he said, can you get together? And this is like a day away from, between, I think, the wedding and coming to Europe, and I'd been in South Africa before, so I didn't really have time. But he reached out and he said, I really could use a good conversation. I had some, kind of in the middle of something with my wife. I'm trying to sort it out. I could use a brother. Can we get together? And I had no time for it. And I said, yes. It's just a lunch and a conversation. And in that hour and a half that we were together, maybe even it was just an hour, but he just shared very openly about his struggle, about the conversation. It's kind of a situation that had happened with his wife. We talked it through. I shared some of my own, situation and similar things that I've worked through, and we really helped each other. And he came out just so happy. He had the joy, and in that joy, he had to sacrifice something that he really wanted to do in order to bless his wife. And he walked out of there feeling God's presence and God's peace. And I was able to help him, and he was able to help me, and we were able to help each other. But we need those decisions and to fight the battle, to be active every day. Love through sacrifice. And the last idea, if we could finish in verses 15, starting in verse 15, it's this really cool passage where he says, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I've learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is the command: love each other. And I wrestled a little bit. What is the word that lands here? And for me, I think the word partnership, love through partnership. And let me explain. Jesus says, you no longer call master, now you call friend. Now, we could misinterpret this and decide, okay, so it's not about obedience anymore. It's not about following the plan of God anymore. We're going to just hang out now. We're buddies. Like, I'm not a master anymore. Now you're my friend. And some of us, it's easier. We try to relate to God like, oh, he's my friend, and we hang out, and, like he's playing video games with me, and we just, and it's kind of, it can be an idea, right? But Jesus is not saying God is no longer the master. He's saying our relationship has evolved to a place where your obedience is through love. Don't look at me as a master. Look at me more closely. Look at me through love. I am on your side. You are my son. You are my daughter. You are my partner. We are together in this. But he's still who we answer to. And so it's love and obedience in the same space. And that's the path that we're looking to get on. Love through partnership. He is our master, and he is our friend. And when we can find that place and hold that place, that is spiritual maturity. Where we can have in that place joy. And in that place shine. Right? We're not just marching in the army of the Lord. We're living out his will. And it's hard, and it's a battle, and we make sacrifices, and we walk together, and in the end, it is absolute joy. And it's the fruit of a life lived in the Lord. And I just will end with this picture. So another one of my mini adventures, a few months ago, I went out to California, and I had a business trip, so I did some work, but then I took a couple of extra days to visit some national parks. Because one of my goals right now in life is to visit all the U.S. national parks. There's 63. I've been to maybe 20-something, so there's some work to do. But I was in California, so I visited, I think it was 3 of the national parks, and one of them is the Sequoia National Park. The sequoia trees, they are some of the largest in the world. They can grow up to 300 feet tall. They can live up to 2,000 or 3,000 years. And they grow at an elevation of maybe 2,500 meters. So it's up, it's elevated, it's on the cliffs, it's on the slopes of mountains that you find these massive trees that have lived and survived and thrived while other trees and species have come and gone through time, through wildfires. They remain. And what is the secret of the sequoia? How is it that they can grow so tall and live on even as other things around succumb to the forces around? And one of the secrets is this idea, their root system, because they're up on the ledges and under the rocks, the roots, they don't have a taproot. It can't go deep, 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 so it has to go wide. And the roots go so wide that they form like a firm foundation. But they go so wide that they actually begin to connect with each other. The roots overlap the roots of the other tree and overlaps the roots of the other tree. And so over the course of 100 meters, all of these trees, all their roots are overlapping each other and they're holding on to each other. So when the fires come and the storms come and the winds come, like they do in Amsterdam, apparently, they stay, they hold. Because they have the nourishment that comes from the soil, the rain, we could equate with what God provides. You need God to survive, but they also hold on to each other. And that's love. Holding on to God, holding on to each other. And I pray that today something in this message has touched your heart, and I hope it can lead to spiritual conversations, spiritual growth. It's been a joy for us to be here in Amsterdam with you. God bless.